Cyberpunk Jordan.
Attention guests in the luggage claim area, welcome to the Jordania Volcano Hotel. A couple of quick reminders before you approach the elevator towards the lobby. Jordan's Soapbox is a show broadcasted on-site and supported via Patreon. If you would like to support what I do and not cause the country of Jordania economic ruin, consider supporting it for behind-the-scenes access and other rewards. It's recommended frequent visitors subscribe to the channel and ring the bell for updates whenever new videos are made. Do you want to hang out with your fellow guests? Consider jacking in to the Cyberpunk Jordan Discord, where you can hang out with me and talk about Sonic and Sega stuff, among other things. And now, our elevator shaft will be departing for the lobby area. Thank you for your attention and enjoy your stay. One of my favorite comics growing up, alongside Sonic the Hedgehog of course, was Marvel's What If, a series focusing on alternate scenarios involving famous Marvel characters hosted by the mysterious Watcher. I've been wanting to do a series that imagines similar what ifs, but for things related to Sonic the Hedgehog or Sega, because the multiverse is truly a strange place. Some worlds can look exactly the same, with only a speck being slightly different. There are others, however, that are so different, they truly deserve to be called other worlds. Tonight we examine Reality 1D, a world discovered by one of our Jordanian small fries. It looks similar to our own, but with a fundamental difference. SATAM had an official conclusion. No, really, I'm not making this up. Such a reality does indeed exist. SATAM is the nickname of the Saturday morning television series Sonic the Hedgehog, released in the early 1990s by Deke Animation. It also had this creepy as heck title sequence.
Deke.
Seriously, the nightmares. It follows Sonic the Hedgehog and the Freedom Fighters as they battle the evil Dr. Robotnik. It lasted for 2 seasons before being unceremoniously cancelled by its network ABC due to low ratings, factors of which included being preempted due to sporting events,
The International Race of Champions, brought to you by the New Dodge, a division of the Chrysler Corporation.
among other factors, Power Rangers. Frickin' teens and their colorful costumes. Anyway, it left the show with an unresolved cliffhanger. And while the comics, also called Sonic the Hedgehog, and from here on out it'll be referred to as Archie Sonic, would continue for 20-something years, the original show that inspired it would be left unresolved. But that didn't mean there weren't any attempts to resolve it. Many of these attempts were spearheaded by former writer Ben Hurst. While he was not the only writer on this show, and he would have been the first to tell you that, he nonetheless wrote some of the best episodes of this series in my opinion, such as Blast from the Past and The Doomsday Project. Over the course of the late 1990s and early 2000s, he led several attempts to revive the series, as chronicled in this excellent video from good old Groovy Jake. Go watch it. It's an hour long, but it's really good. One of these attempts nearly made it to fruition, but it was allegedly sabotaged by Ken Penders, a prominent writer at the time and familiar for all the wrong reasons for longtime viewers of this show, for Archie Sonic. That was a mouthful. In the early 2000s, Ben Hurst was attempting to pitch the idea of a movie to Sega to finish the series, with Penders catching wind of it. There are wildly different views of what happened next from Hurst and Penders. I'll start off with Penders and their interpretation of events. In 2023, Ken Penders wrote an article on his official website entitled Sonic Armageddon, or What a Long Strange Journey It's Been, which is focused on his failed Sonic movie idea titled Sonic Armageddon. It is a fascinating article that I do recommend reading for that topic alone, although take it with a grain of salt, as with anything. But it contains details, according to Penders anyway, about what happened between him and Ben Hurst. Quote, "It wasn't long after that, however, when an alumni of the SATAM series contacted Archie Comics with a feeler to see if they'd be interested in hiring him to write a Sonic story, or two. Specifically, he wanted a chance to see the story ideas he proposed for the third season adapted in the comics format. His name was Ben Hurst, and I was given his number by the Sonic editor at the time and told to call Ben to see how viable the project was. The idea, according to Penders, was for Hurst to finish the story of SATAM in a Sonic Super Special, and it was then approved by then editor-in-chief Justin Gabriel. However, it allegedly fell apart once Hurst learned of what he would be paid. $45 per page, which amounts to a measly $1,800 for the entire book. Hurst, again according to Penders, would move on to another idea. Something animated. Long story short, Ben had asked if I would use my contacts at Sega to see if they would be interested in paying me and him to develop a new animated Sonic project. Immediately, alarm bells went off in my head. I was living outside of Buffalo, New York, working in the comics industry while Ben was an established writer in Hollywood with animated series credits to his name. Out of the two of us, who do you think was the most likely to get an animated project off the ground? I responded by telling Ben that I thought it would be highly unlikely that Sega would pay us to develop an animated project. If anything, they would expect us to pay them. I had enough experience by that point dealing with licensed properties to know the owner of any IP is looking for a payday when it comes to using the rights for their properties. I was bewildered wondering why Ben didn't know this already. Needless to say, I didn't sign on to Ben's proposal. He may have no problem throwing his credibility out the window, but I didn't have any credibility to throw out at the time. When I did speak to the Sega licensing manager, this person only confirmed what I knew to be a fact. Neither Ben or I would have gotten even a meeting with Sega if the premise was for them to pay us. There's one tiny little issue with this version of the story. Ben Hurst, who wrote his accounts of events in the early 2000s, was likely never interested in licensing the rights to Sonic during this attempt. His idea was for Sega to, quote, become invested in the idea by hiring us to interview their creative game designers, executives, etc., and see if we could develop a storyline, emphasis mine, that would fulfill the third season, and simultaneously give them creative ideas to develop new games. Essentially, Hurst wanted to be a screenwriter for a Sonic movie and maybe some other stuff, and not someone who licensed Sonic the Hedgehog. The Sega representative that Hurst was in contact with wasn't happy, exclaiming, quote, people pay us to develop Sonic product. We don't pay them, before hanging up. And they aren't wrong if we are talking about licensing. As if a company wants to license something from another company, yeah, they have to pay up. The idea is backed up further when Hurst claims that after the failed attempt, Penders allegedly said Hurst, quote, doesn't know how movies are made in Hollywood, unquote. I am, unfortunately, unable to find the source of this quote in question. Hurst responded by asking Ken to get some humility and a copy of Adventures in Screenwriting by William Goldman. Screenwriting. You know, something that a company does pay you to do, according to Indeed. Who knew a job search site would actually come in handy this time? So, my conclusion looking at these two interpretations is that this attempt failed due to unintentional sabotage from Penders. He comes from being a freelancer for a licensed comic book, which absolutely influences how we would deliver an idea like this to Sega. I know there's this conspiracy theory that he did so due to attempting his own Sonic movie with Sonic Armageddon, and while I wouldn't rule it out that he was inspired by the attempt, it didn't exist at the time. That doesn't mean there isn't a lot to criticize Penders for, such as this lovely little tweet he made in 2020. Quote, I know how it originated. The sad fool actually thought Sega was going to pay us to make a movie. Here I was, working for a comic publisher who paid Sega for the right to produce a comic book, and he believed Sega would pay us. Delusional. I should likely mention that Hurst died in 2010 from complications related to diabetes. So,
Oh, no.
Ken Penders.
Oh no.
But in this alternate timeline, things are different. Ken Penders is not involved whatsoever in this attempt. Rejoice! His input is neither wanted, warranted, and honestly, we'd be better off he just wasn't involved at all. The attempt already had the listening ear of an unnamed Sega representative before Penders was even involved. Quote, I did consult with Deke to see if there was a way to generate some enthusiasm for a feature film to be the, quote, third season, unquote, of SATAM. I was given the name of a Sega representative and had a most pleasant conversation. She had to go to a meeting, but she said she would like to talk to me more about the idea. Without Penders to unintentionally misrepresent Hearst, Sega right from the start would be under the correct impression that Hearst is advocating for the development and screenwriter position of a movie version of SATAM. So, would Sega have actually gone for it? I actually think so, for the following reasons. One, Hearst did have a lot of credit to his name. That's something Penders did say that is correct. In the animation industry and beyond, so his word would likely be taken with serious consideration. Two, Sega was looking for anything cheap and profitable during the early 2000s. They were bleeding a lot of money due to the declining arcade business and the failure of the Sega Dreamcast and getting out of that console business. 3. SATAM hadn't been cancelled for long when this attempt was made. The comic that it was inspired from was still very successful, even with these two chucklenuts writing this thing. Sega of America would have likely approved the budget for a small direct-to-video film. I know there's certain folks that wanted a SATAM film on the big screen, but this sadly doesn't match with the reality of that time or even this one. Films that were 2D or hand-drawn were financial failures at the box office, such as Treasure Planet and Sinbad: The Voyage. Since this film would have likely been hand-drawn for both aesthetic and financial reasons, it would have made Sega skittish about releasing the film in theaters, especially due to its small audience with this version of the character. A direct-to-video release would not only have been cheaper, but considering the success of direct-to-video films from Disney during this time, such as Mulan 2, despite it absolutely tarnishing the company's image with stuff like this, and also this, it would have led to a better profit margin overall. So the choice is made to release it direct-to-video and a limited advertising budget. As I mentioned, Sega wasn't exactly printing a ton of money at the time. It would have received a commercial or two on TV, print advertisements, and maybe some tie-in merchandise. Man, I really just want a Sally Acorn figure, goodness. So what would this movie even look like? It's difficult to determine, as Ben Hearst was understandably tight-lipped about ideas for a conclusion of SATAM, in the off chance that it did see the light of day. But this reality does offer a glimpse into some ideas he had, taking into account the say of Sega. The data here, unfortunately, is very scrambled, but I think I can come up with an overall outline. We start with a short recap of the events of SATAM thus far. Dr. Robotnik and his nephew Snively have taken over Mobius and turned it into a technological nightmare, and Sonic and the Freedom Fighters have successfully defeated him during the events of the Doomsday Project. Sonic and the Freedom Fighters would at first celebrate their victory over Robotnik, but soon realized that their fight wasn't over. Snively survived and is now in command of the remains of Robotropolis, along with his ally Isis Nagus, the former magician of the Kingdom of Acorn who's been trapped in the Zone of Silence. They work to further their dastardly schemes in taking over the world with, magic. Yeah, that's what it says here, magic. Robotnik is still alive after the events of the Doomsday Project, but his role has been greatly reduced to simply being a lackey of Isis and Snively. Maybe he's even locked up, similar to how Dr. Eggman was in Iron Dominion. Sonic and the Freedom Fighters would need to contact other Freedom Fighter groups across Mobius to face this threat in a globe-trotting adventure. It would lead to a final battle, which Sonic and the Freedom Fighters would, of course, win. And Mobius is at last freed from the forces of evil. Maybe Sonic and Sally kiss or something, I don't know, the data's kind of really fuzzy on that one. That's at least why I think the movie would be based on this data. Of course, there would likely be more to it than that, Knuckles seems to be in it, but what would matter the most is that it would establish a definitive conclusion to SATAM. The film would be a modest success, considering the audience of SATAM, and therefore a financial success for Sega. One of the few bright spots in an otherwise dire financial report. But there would be far more consequences than simply a movie being released. I doubt the Freedom Fighters would appear in future media outside the ongoing comic series, as it was a one-and-done movie that was meant to finish an older, discontinued version of the character. Plus Hearst, I know he was trying to find an incentive for Sega to greenlight this thing with new game ideas, but at least for the main series, which was developed mostly by Japanese staff, it's unlikely that they would want to take ideas from something viewed as strictly an American incarnation of the character. Sega of Japan and Sega of America were effectively two wildly different companies, and it wasn't until recently that changed. I wouldn't rule out ideas being used in spin-off titles, though, developed in the United States from third-party companies such as THQ. No, not that one, the other one. Not that one, the other one. Thank you. But there's not enough data on the existence of those in this reality. But one thing that is certain is the comics would feel the influence of the movie, with a likely uptick of sales due to the release of a movie that is somewhat related to the comic. I mean, not really. Technically, they're both their own thing. Yeah, look, it's complicated. But, unlike in our timeline, the creative shifts that would force Penders out of Sonic the Hedgehog would happen much sooner, as the idea is that with an increase of eyes on the comic, a creative shift is needed to accommodate it. Ian Flynn is still hired, but he's not going to be the head writer for a couple more years. An unnamed writer will be taking that place. I don't really know who. The data is really scrambled about that one. Seriously, this is like scrambled eggs. By the time this takes place, I think mistakes like Sonic 134 still would happen, but would be quickly retconned out, and the version of Sonic 150, 151 that we have in our timeline doesn't exist there. It really is heaven on earth. The comic would still continue more or less as it does in our timeline after Ian took over, but the reboot of the series, commonly referred to as the post-Super Genesis wave, would occur differently. That's because the lawsuit between Archie Comics and Ken Penders ends up a little bit different in this reality. So, I mentioned in Does Ken Penders Own Anything that Sega was not involved in Archie vs. Penders, likely because they didn't see the need to defend characters they weren't interested in using outside of a licensed work. But in this alternate timeline, Sega would have more of a reason, as the lawsuit would threaten Sega using derivatives of several characters that were recently used in that film, and other characters that could be used in future works. So when Penders starts filing copyright registrations with the US Copyright Office, both Sega and Archie sue Ken Penders. Because of the influx of money and an excellent legal team from the start, the case is decided in favor of Sega and Archie. The characters are firmly under their ownership, Penders walks away with absolutely nothing, and is forced to discontinue the Lara Sue Chronicles. This altered timeline, though, wouldn't affect the eventual discontinuation of Archie Sonic, as even in this timeline, Archie just was really wanting to focus more on its own in-house properties by the later 2010s, but it would have at least ended on better terms. What about Ben? He fulfilled his dream to finally finish SATAM. I imagine he would write a message on a forum somewhere, thanking his team for making it happen. His dream, and the long efforts to make that dream a reality, finally came to pass. Out of anything I've ever researched, I've never encountered someone as deeply passionate and enthusiastic as Hearst was. In this timeline, the failed attempt would not deter him, as he would continue attempts to have SATAM return in some form or another, until his tragic death in 2010, all the while being one heck of a class act. It's a shame that he's not here with us today, or that his dreams never did become a reality, because he was one of the biggest advocates of SATAM there ever could be, and the world is so much worse off without him, whether in this reality or other worlds entirely.
Thank you for visiting the Jordania Volcano Hotel. We hope that you'll visit again soon. Before you leave, would you like something from our gift shop? Becca has the latest and totally not looted goods from all over the world. One item of note is the subscribe button, coming from the US state of California. It works best when you ring its bell and turn on notifications, so you don't miss an episode of Jordan's Soapbox. We also have a limited edition video that we also think you might like, and a collection of Jordan's Soapbox episodes in a playlist, all for the price of... wait a minute. Free? We're giving these out for free? Becca, we are